the head of the stretcher barked something at him in Chinese. He shook his head and locked eyes with her. She barked at him again, louder and with more vitriol, and this time he understood without translation, "Get the hell out of our way." He twisted his body and swung his right leg, and then his left, over the side of the bed of the pickup. When his feet hit the ground, he wobbled and almost collapsed. Both of his legs were numb from the long ride crouched beside Batur. He shuffled his feet in place, working the circulation back into his muscles as pins and needles flared everywhere from his hips down. He watched as two male hospital workers loaded Batur onto the gurney and connected monitor cables to his chest. In concert, the woman retrieved a bag mask and used it to force oxygen into the Uyghur's swollen face, each squeeze reverberating like wet, rhythmic flatulence. Just as feeling was returning to his legs, the doctor barked at Nick again. This time he shrugged incomprehension. Still keeping his distance, Bai intervened, rattling off several sentences in Mandarin so quickly Nick couldn't make out a single word.
"You'll come,"
she replied, exasperated and wagging a finger at Nick, Yvette, and Bai.
"All come."
Yvette squeezed Nick's arm. "We are not responsible for what happened to him," she said, her voice both defensive and worried. "They know that, right?" "Yes," he said, trying not to sound condescending. "Believe me, they know." They entered the hospital via what Nick deduced was the emergency room entrance. Double glass doors swished open and a blast of cool, conditioned air washed over him as he trailed the EMS team inside. Yvette walked beside him, her expression grave, while Bai trailed reluctantly behind. Halfway down the long gray hallway, the lead doctor pointed to an open door and barked a command in Chinese. This time she looked only at Bai when she rattled off her instructions before spinning on a heel and charging off after her team down the corridor. Bai folded his arms across his chest. "They wish for us to wait here," he said, gesturing at the open door. "They will need some information." Nick nodded and stepped into a waiting room not much bigger than a closet. Rows of round-backed plastic chairs, all a horrible orange color, were bolted to two walls. Nick imagined the space was used as a consultation room, where hurried doctors gave families shitty prognoses about their loved ones. He sighed in surrender and collapsed into one of the molded plastic chairs. Bai took a seat across from him, but kept his eyes downcast on the floor. Nick felt a headache coming on. He leaned his head back against the wall and groaned his displeasure at the world. Yvette dropped into the chair beside him. After a silent pause, she clutched his arm, leaned her head against his shoulder, and began to sob. He pulled his left arm free and wrapped it around her, then closed his eyes and tenderly stroked her shoulder while she wept. Her tears were not for Batur, he knew. These were tears of dread. The door clicked. His eyes popped open, and he saw the waiting room door had been pulled shut by someone from the outside. He wondered if it was courtesy for the grieving or a signal of isolation. Both, if they're clever. And since coming to this country, he had found the Chinese to be nothing if not clever.
"I have never seen anything like that. Never,"
said Yvette, her Belgian Dutch accent thicker than normal with emotion. Nick nodded. "I know." "I hope we are not to get sick, Nick Foley," Bai said in a tone that almost sounded accusatory. Nick shifted his gaze to Bai, but the Chinese man was staring out the window, his brow furrowed with anxiety. Like his companions, Nick felt dread percolating inside. In his haste to help Batur, he had made a mistake, quite possibly a deadly mistake, by exposing them all to this unknown scourge. Bai talked often and fondly of his wife and two children. Nick didn't know if he could bear the guilt if those kids lost their father because of him. Suddenly, Bai jumped to his feet, eyes riveted out the window. He mumbled something in Chinese, his voice harried. Nick was about to ask what he saw when the door to the room burst open. In the doorway stood a man dressed in a blue suit with an integrated hood, yellow gloves that reached nearly to his elbows, and heavy rubber boots. He wore a gray mask, like a fighter pilot, only this one had purple straps that bunched the blue hood around his cheeks. He eyed each of them in turn from behind bug-eyed protective goggles and then barked a stern warning in Chinese. He repeated the command for effect. Nick noticed an unmistakable quiver in the man's voice, one born more of fear than anger.